A dangerous cache of sophisticated, illegal weapons, a hand-drawn map of a police station, and a chilling manifesto. These were the tools that one individual allegedly put together to seek martyrdom right here on U.S. soil. This plot, was unfolding quietly on a university campus, and it serves as a stark, really undeniable reminder that the threats we read about in our national security reports, they aren't abstract. They are manifesting right now, right in our own backyards. Today, we're taking a deep dive into alarming convergence of source material. We're going to dissect the recent news reports around the arrest of a University of Delaware student, Luqmaan Khan, and we're placing that incident directly against the backdrop of the Comprehensive Intelligence and the Homeland Threat Assessment 2025, the HTA, and some deep academic research into, well, the ideology behind suicide terrorism.
And the initial details of this case, they really just underscore the seriousness of the danger that was, thankfully, neutralized. You're talking about a 25-year-old American citizen of Pakistani origin, Luqmaan Khan. He was arrested back on November 24th after acting suspiciously in his pickup truck. It was in a park after hours. And when officers simply approached the vehicle, they realized pretty quickly this wasn't just a simple traffic violation.
And what investigators found right there in that truck, that was just the tip of a truly terrifying iceberg.
Exactly. The initial seizure included a .357 Glock pistol, several loaded 27-round magazines, and body armor plates. But here's where the sophistication really starts to kick in. The pistol was already converted into a semi-automatic rifle.
Using an illegal modification kit.
An illegal kit, yes. And then there was a notebook. And this wasn't just, random scribblings. It described explicit plans to attack the University of Delaware Police Headquarters.
I think for me, the most chilling part of those notes has to be that mix of tactical planning and the ideological justification.
Absolutely. The notebook had a map of the target headquarters. It had marked entry points, exit points.
So he'd done surveillance.
He'd done his homework. He planned escape routes. It also contained phrases like kill all martyrdom, and it detailed specific warfare techniques. This was a comprehensive, targeted plan for mass violence.
And that really is the core of our mission today, to analyze the sheer lethality and the level of preparation in this specific domestic plot, and then connect it directly to this overarching high terrorism threat environment and the systemic vulnerabilities that our own intelligence community identified in the recent Homeland Threat Assessment.
So let's pull the lens closer on the Khan case itself, because that initial vehicle search only hinted at the kind of firepower he actually had. When we talk about lone offenders, this individual had clearly amassed an arsenal designed to maximize casualties. The full extent of his readiness really came to light when the FBI executed a search warrant at his home in Wilmington. What they recovered there pushed this case way beyond a standard weapons charge and right into the realm of a fully prepared terror attack.
So what was it specifically? What elevated the threat level from, high-capacity pistols and body armor to something far, far more dangerous?
Agents found an AR-style rifle with a red dot scope and, crucially, another Glock pistol. And this one had been illegally modified with a device that's commonly known as a Glock switch.
Which is a small, cheap piece of hardware, right?
It is, but it turns a legal handgun into a fully automatic machine gun.
And that distinction, semi-automatic versus fully automatic, that is absolutely vital for understanding the threat here. It's the difference between a calculated killing and just mass carnage.
Precisely. That weapon was capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute.
1,200?
Just think about that lethality. That's 20 bullets every single second. This isn't something an average criminal gets their hands on. This is the destructive capacity of military-grade weaponry. And a lone offender was able to acquire it and operate it. It shows an alarming level of sophistication and a real commitment to high-casualty violence.
And his plans weren't just about general chaos, either. The notes were highly focused. They even named specific people.
Yes, the plan named one specific University of Delaware campus police officer as a target. And when the police confronted him, Khan allegedly laid out his ultimate motivation quite clearly. He said that becoming a martyr was, and I'm quoting, one of the greatest things you can do. This is where you see the tactical preparation, the 1,200 rounds per minute weapon blending with the ideological fuel that makes these lone offenders so incredibly dangerous.
That combination of illegal, high-capacity, automatic fire tower, the targeted violence, and that ideological drive for martyrdom. It makes this a textbook, just a devastating example of the threat our intelligence community is constantly warning us about. This is exactly the kind of lone offender threat that the Homeland Threat Assessment 2025 identifies as the greatest danger, because they can strike with little to no warning.
And that's the critical connection we have to draw here. This plot in Delaware, it's not some isolated crime story. It reflects a national security threat environment that is highly pressurized and, frankly, persistent.
So let's zoom out then. The Khan case shows us one fire starter. But to really understand the fuel that's feeding this fire, we need to look at the HTA 2025. What is the intel telling us about the environment that lets this ideology flourish?
The assessment is, well, it's crystal clear. The terrorism threat environment in the homeland will remain high all the way through 2025. And the drivers behind this sustained risk level, they're overwhelmingly tied to international events and how foreign organizations use those events to radicalize people who are already living right here within our borders.
And we're talking specifically about conflicts like the Israel-Hamas conflict, correct?
Yeah.
How does a conflict thousands of miles away translate into a concrete threat in, say, Delaware?
It creates a kind of digital kindling. The HTA highlights that foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs, and domestic extremists are actively and, I should say, successfully leveraging these ongoing international conflicts to justify and encourage attacks here at home. They use these events to validate their narratives and to activate individuals who might already be feeling alienated or, motivated by extremist views.
Now, these global groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they're maintaining a pretty consistent strategy of inspiration.
They absolutely maintain the enduring intent to conduct or inspire attacks in the homeland. We've even seen strategic shifts to make this outreach more direct and more dangerous. For example, Al-Qaeda specifically reinvigorated its outreach in December of 2023, targeting Western audiences. And they're not just sending vague propaganda, they are providing specific, actionable material. We're talking bomb-making instructions, urging attacks against civil aviation, against prominent individuals. It's a direct playbook for terror.
And we know ISIS Khorasan, or ISIS-K, has been capitalizing on these high-profile attacks abroad to fuel recruitment and galvanize supporters all over the world.
Precisely. ISIS-K uses its successes as powerful recruitment tools. The lethal 2024 attacks they claimed in Iran and Russia, killing over 95 and 140 people, that's highly effective propaganda. They capitalize on that violence to galvanize their global supporters, including diaspora populations in other countries, pushing individuals to mobilize to violence. So that connection between global conflict, foreign terror groups, and domestic radicalization, that remains the primary nexus concern for the HTA.
That terrifying link brings us directly to the mindset, Khan's chilling desire for martyrdom. It aligns perfectly with this tactical and ideological concept of suicide terrorism that the academic sources explore. It speaks to a deep, organized history of using self-destruction as a weapon.
Academically, this tactic, which is often labeled suicide missions, but, more accurately called martyrdom operations by the perpetrators themselves, is cited as the single most lethal form of terrorism. And tragically, it's on the increase. Between 2012 and 2013 alone, these attacks rose by 46%.
46% in 1 year.
In 1 year, resulting in 3,743 deaths in 2013 alone. The lethality is just staggering, and it's because the perpetrators are able to maximize damage right up until the last second with no concern for their own survival.
How do scholars actually define this concept? What is a martyrdom operation?
It's defined as the targeted use of self-destructing humans against non-combatant populations to effect political change. It is a calculated weapon. Now, historically, the conventional wisdom among political scientists was that these individuals were not suicidal in, say, a clinical sense.
Right, they were seen as rational actors.
Exactly. Rational actors driven purely by political or religious ideology. Their motivation was state change, not personal despair.
But the research we're looking at today suggests that clean distinction might be based on some faulty assumptions. It shows a more complex, maybe more vulnerable human element at play.
That's the crux of the modern psychological debate. The argument is that the assertion that terrorists are never suicidal, well, that might be based on early anecdotal profiling, not systematic study. Emerging evidence suggests suicidality does play a role in a significant minority of cases. For instance, one controlled study found that 40% of would-be bombers displayed suicidal tendencies.
40%, that is exponentially higher than you'd find in the general population.
Far, far in excess.
So it's often this blend of personal turmoil, whether it's despair or feeling lost, being successfully weaponized by a powerful, externally supplied ideology.
Precisely. And terrorist organizations are masters of cultivating this environment. They actively build cultures of martyrdom using propaganda to celebrate those who undertake these missions. But they're also highly strategic. They often screen out the mentally unstable. They're looking for individuals who are highly motivated but also stable enough to execute the mission successfully, covertly. The goal is ideological, to justify an act suicide that would normally be unacceptable within their community by framing it as a sacred, coercive duty.
And it makes you wonder where Luqmaan Khan falls on that spectrum. Was he a rational, focused operative, or was there an element of personal crisis that made him receptive to this culture of martyrdom? Regardless, the group ideology provided the ultimate justification for his attempt at mass casualty. That challenge identifying who is vulnerable to this ideology and where the external threat meets the internal one brings us to the transnational nature of the threat. The perpetrator in Delaware was an American citizen of Pakistani origin. This really underscores the difficulty of protecting the nation when threats are persistent, transnational, and can be activated from within. And this leads us directly to the systemic vulnerabilities we face, particularly at our borders, as detailed in the HTA 2025.
The assessment puts border integrity very high on the list of persistent concerns. The HTA notes that individuals with terrorism connections are continually attempting to exploit the complex migration flows to enter the United States. They use the chaotic environment at the border to mask their entry.
And when we talk about individuals with terrorism connections, what mechanism do we actually use to identify them? And how often are we encountering them?
We're referring to individuals who are on the terrorist screening data set, often just called the TSDS or the watch list. These are people flagged by the U.S. government as having possible links to terrorism. Their inclusion on that list immediately triggers increased scrutiny upon any encounter.
So give us the hard numbers from the HTA 2025 on these watch list encounters. These statistics, which cover fiscal year 2024 through July, are pretty eye-opening.
They absolutely are. The data confirms our borders remain highly vulnerable to exploitation. Approximately 139 watch-listed individuals were encountered at the U.S.-Mexico border over those 10 months. And even more alarming, 283 watch-listed individuals were encountered at the U.S.-Canada border.
That sheer volume is the key takeaway, isn't it? Nearly 300 individuals flagged by the government for possible terror links were caught trying to cross our northern border in less than a year. It demonstrates that terrorists and their associates are persistently testing and exploiting all of our boundaries to gain access to the homeland.
And this leads to that analytical link between terrorism and the other great national security threat. The vulnerability that terrorists exploit is the very same infrastructure vulnerability that allows transnational criminal organizations, TCOs, to operate with near impunity.
And while the Delaware plot highlight ideological terrorism, the persistent threat from TCOs is, statistically speaking, the most lethal daily threat to our communities. And it, too, uses the border as its entry point.
The HTA 2025 emphasizes this point. Beyond the terror threat, the production and trafficking of illegal drugs by TCOs remains the most lethal threat to U.S. communities. The financial and societal damage they inflict through the fentanyl crisis is, well, it's catastrophic. And the border environment is generating massive revenue for those who seek to harm us.
And the staggering scale of the fentanyl seizures really drives that point home.
It does. While seizures declined slightly in FY 2024 through August, DHS still seized over 27,000 pounds of fentanyl.
27,000 pounds.
And to put that quantity in perspective for you, the listener, that amount is large enough to kill the entire American population many, many times over. The continued flow proves that TCOs are ruthlessly and successfully exploiting these vulnerabilities. It is a persistent, multifaceted national security failure.
So we've mapped a clear and terrifying path today. From an individual with a high-powered arsenal seeking martyrdom on a university campus in Delaware, all the way back to the global FTO networks intent on inspiring violence. And the systemic challenge of defending a permeable border environment where both terrorists and drug traffickers find entry. The threat is complex, multi-layered, and it requires vigilance at every single level.
The facts on the ground are stark. The reality is the threat environment remains high. We've seen the recovery of an illegally converted automatic machine gun capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute, a true instrument of mass carnage aimed at a campus police department. And we see the persistence of watch list encounters, 139 at the southern border and 283 at the northern border in just 10 months of data. The danger is not theoretical. It's manifesting through both ideological violence and lethal narcotics. So given the complex individual motivations for suicide terror, that blend of personal crises with group-sanctioned ideology, and knowing that recruiters actively seek stable, highly motivated individuals to execute these missions, how must our counterterrorism strategies evolve? We have to move beyond solely relying on the physical interdiction of an individual who has already fully embraced this idea of self-destruction, and instead figure out how to dismantle the ideological justification for martyrdom operations at its core. It is the battle for the mind that remains the central, most difficult challenge facing our intelligence community.